Hello and welcome. This is a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld.org. We continue our podcasts about the war which Russia began against Ukraine. This series is brought to you by Internews Ukraine and Ukraine Crisis Media Center, two Ukrainian media NGOs. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor of UkraineWorld.org and analytics director at Internews Ukraine. We are making this podcast with Tetyana Ogarkova, who is in charge of international outreach of Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Hello, Tanya.
Hello, Volodymyr.
Before we start, let me remind you that you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. Our topic today is what the whole world is talking about, is what we would call Bucha Massacre. We can also use the term Irpin Massacre or Hostomel Massacre or even more broadly Kyiv Massacre, because all these are Kyiv suburbs, the tiny cities that are linked to Kyiv. And yesterday there was the photos, the videos were revealed of just inhumane tragedies that took place in these cities because, as we know, Russians have left after the fights these cities. Ukrainians entered the cities and what they have seen. Tanya.
Yeah, and we can also add Matyzhino, Ivankiv, or all what we call Zhytomyr Road. So many villages, in fact. So this is not only Bucha, just to let us highlight that this is not only Bucha, and the same situation can be observed everywhere to the north from Kyiv. So the way where Russians came up to Kyiv and then they went back, and just a few days ago we were able to see what was happening there. So what we see many civilians killed, civilians without any defense, and we see also a lot of women killed, raped, and then killed, and then their corpses burnt by these Russian soldiers. This is impossible to describe. You've all seen these videos, these photos. We have some testimonies from our friends who came to Bucha yesterday night just to see people who have their homes there and who were able to see what was happening, in fact. So it is not like Mariupol. Still some houses are there. They're not all in ruins, but we are all without... It's difficult to describe our reaction, because how can you describe your reaction when you see the places you know in such a state, and when you see dead bodies on the road, and you see these mass graves, and we have friends who saw mass graves yesterday night, and a lot of people without news from their families who are trying to search for somebody and trying to understand if their relatives or somebody from their families are there inside these graves, because mass graves there were open yesterday already. It's still yesterday, just for people maybe to be able to identify if their relatives are inside or outside or whatever. So there is no words about what was happening. What is clear for us. It is clear that there were no military necessity, no military objective to do all that. There is no military necessity to kill people without arms. So this is clear for us. So we are talking today about genocide, about this action against civilians. This is not from distance. This is not from missiles or from grads. You know that a lot of victims were in many cities, but it is from shelling. You know, when you press, it's about bombs, so you don't see the faces of your victims. Now you see the faces of your victims. So this is a kind of different level of cruelty and different level of barbarism, how we call that, all that. This is about extermination. This is a war about extermination of Ukrainians everywhere where Russian army is. So, and we understand that we will discover such pictures everywhere where Russian army is present at that very moment we are talking. So, for example, in Mariupol, or maybe in some villages in Kharkiv regions, or maybe in Kherson. Why not in Kherson? And what is important to say that in Bucha there were no pro-Ukrainian manifestations, nothing like that, because Russians arrived in Bucha during the first days of this war. And there were no flags, no manifestation, nothing like that. The normal, peaceful people living in their homes and hiding in their caves, all that. And in Kherson, for example, we may see even more atrocities because people were coming up to the streets. So we are to find words for that, because at that very moment we are not. We can speak about genocide. We can speak about military crimes. We can speak about what? About inhumane behavior. We can speak about this battle between civilization and how we call that, barbarism, because we have proofs of Russian troops when they go away from these villages and small cities. They were taking everything they could. I mean, even all kind of coffee machines, printers, all kind of stuff. Yeah. So this is about mass destruction.
And of course, you probably have seen all those photos. If you haven't seen them, go to our Twitter, UkraineWorld, and under hashtag Russian war crimes, you can find those horrible photos, videos. What we see from these videos and photos, that, for example, on the Zhytomyr road, the one big route coming from the west to Kyiv, there were big fights and people were trying to escape in the first days. If you came to Ukraine, for example, for Euro 2012 football championship, you would probably use this road, Zhytomyr road, because it joins the western Ukraine with Kyiv. And we have seen on these photos that, dead bodies just on the road for this, for several weeks, and of course that they started to decompose. We see lots of civilian vehicles who are just burned down, which are shot with atomic rifles. So unfortunately, this is indeed, we see so many cases of civilians being killed with purpose. Right, and these massacres show us that. In Bucha, there are also testimonies that people were smashed in their cars by the tanks, and still some bodies are inside these cars. We also published a video by Denis Kazansky, Ukrainian journalist and blogger, who was there in Bucha and who filmed that. So you can see it on our Twitter. There are, we see the mass graves. We see the graves not in Bucha, but in a different town, 50 kilometers from Kyiv, when it's actually a village. When the head of this village were just tortured and killed with her family and just buried in the land without any coffins, without nothing, of course, just buried, just. And, these pictures with mass graves, when people who buried them, most probably their neighbors, they just constructed some improvised crosses with branches of little tiny branches of trees, for example, right? And this also shows how horrible it is.
And we are in search of meaning. We are in search of signification. I don't know, meaning of all these acts. And today in the morning, we discover a new piece of this Russian view of what's happening. Because after this discovery of Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel, because situation is not specific in Bucha. They took place everywhere when they were present. And we find a text published today in a Russian resource called RIA Novosti.
The state Russian news agency.
News agency. And we are in a way overwhelmed of what we are reading, because they are talking today about a kind of justification of such a behavior. They are talking about denazification, which was proclaimed to be the objective of this military campaign in Ukraine, but now they are talking about the Ukrainization, how we call it in English, of this Nazi country they call Ukraine, and they try to justify these mass murders of Ukrainian civilians, stating that not only Ukrainian military are guilty, but also civilians are guilty. And let me, for example, quote just the very beginning of this article, and then we'll continue. to do so with the important messages. So it starts like that. The second paragraph. Denazification is necessary when a significant part of the people, most likely the majority, has been mastered and drawn into the Nazi policy in its politics. That is, when the hypothesis that people are good, the government is bad, doesn't work. Recognition of this fact is the basis of the policy of denazification, of all its measures, and the fact itself in its subject matter. Ukraine is in just such a situation. The fact that the Ukrainian voter voted for the peace of Poroshenko or peace of Zelensky should not be misleading. The Ukrainians are quite satisfied with the shortest path to peace through the blitzkrieg, which is the last two Ukrainian presidents transparently hinted at when they were elected. It was this method of appeasement of internal anti-fascists through total terror. It was used in Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Mariupol, and other Russian cities, they say. I'm ending this. And this quite suited the common Ukrainian. Denazification is a set of measures in relation to the Nazified population mass, which technically cannot be subjected to direct punishment as war criminals. So this is the very beginning of this article, and now we see that they are trying to blame not only government but also population. So we are all guilty. So it means directly that we are also to be exterminated, killed in a way. Right?
Yeah, they're talking about the passive Nazis or the masses. So this is a opinion piece, right, on RIA Novosti, and but still, it's RIA Novosti. It's the most official Russian news agency, right? And the key tool of Russian propaganda. And what the author is saying is that in addition to destruction of the active Nazis, let's call it in that way, now, a quote, a significant part of the masses which are passive Nazis, accomplices of Nazism, are also guilty. They supported and indulged Nazi government. The just punishment of this part of the population is possible only as bearing the inevitable hardship of a just war against the Nazi system. You know?
Let me draw your attention to another quotation, what they call Nazification. So at least we understand what their way of thinking. For example, clearly in this article now I read, the Nazification of Ukraine continued for more than 30 years, beginning at least at 1989, when Ukrainian nationalism received legal and legitimate forms of political expression and led to the movement for independence towards Nazism. So what they call Nazification, this is a process of independence of Ukraine, which started back in Perestroika.
They're saying that being Ukrainian is already being Nazi.
Yeah, or
As
being
simple as
democratic
that.
state, like Ukraine became a democratic state back in 91, right, with its independence, and we have all these democratic institutions. So for them, this is equal to Nazification. So this is a complete, we call it, bullshit, complete...
Well, this is a complete nightmare because they call Nazism a democracy, the democratic movement where you have freedom of speech, where you have competition, where you have fair election. That's what they call Nazis. And indeed, they are basically saying, this author and on RIA Novosti is basically saying that they're not only targeting some battalions, like Azov battalion, they can think that this is a Nazi or whatever, or some nationalists. No, they want to exterminate basically all people who identify themselves as Ukrainians, who want Ukrainian independence, who do not identify themselves as Russians.
Yeah, and even then the name Ukraine has to be forbidden according to this article. For example, here we read that the name Ukraine, I quote here, the name Ukraine apparently can be retained as a title of any fully denazified state entity in a territorial liberated from the Nazis regime. So they imagine that after this process of denazification, there will be no Ukraine at all, no country like Ukraine. So this is a complete nightmare, and complete.
So this is a declaration of intent.
Yeah.
The declaration of the intended genocide. They clearly show that they want to exterminate all Ukrainians who identify themselves as Ukrainians know that they no longer make any distinction between Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking, because if you're Russian-speaking but want an independent Ukraine, you are a Nazi, according to this estimation. So this is it. This is their logic, and this is the nightmare they're living in. And with this logic, as we have been saying for many, many years, we were asked by, about what do you think about Russian disinformation, etc. And we were saying, look, it's not about disinformation. It's about hating. It's about mass production of hate, mass production of dehumanization. Russian propaganda, like RIA Novosti, was a mass production of dehumanization. And I think that it is also, we should stop comparing Hitler and Putin. We should stop comparing Nazism and Putinism, because Putinism is in a special type of evil with its special characteristics, which has much more in common probably with Stalinism. And one of because we were saying it, when Russians have imposed this ultimatum to NATO and to Ukraine, NATO, the Western world, that they want to come back to this Yalta, system of the world. If you want to come back to Yalta system of the world, you need to become Stalin. Mm-hmm. There is no other way you can come back to it. You need to make purges inside the country. You need to just purge Russia from any liberal elements, any freedom of speech, and this is what is happening. And you need also start purging, genociding the other nations, other ethnicities, what Stalin was doing, right?
I think that maybe just to oppose to this nightmare, to this absolutely crazy text, in fact, because if you read, we will publish it, this text is English translation in many resources, so our audience, you will be able to read what he's talking about. This is a complete nonsense, in fact, but it comes together. Let's not forget that this text comes together with an important military defeat of Russia at that very moment on the Ukrainian land. So what we see that they are withdrawing their troops from Kyiv region, from Chernihiv as well. For example, today we received information about the road which already functions between Kyiv and Chernihiv. This is a miracle for us. This means for us that we can still save many people who are inside Chernihiv. Chernihiv is destroyed up to 70%, in terms of buildings. So Chernihiv, one of the most ancient and valuable cities in Ukraine, is destroyed, but they are withdrawing their troops. They are about to start another military plan, second, I don't know exactly, maybe third or fourth plan, just to re-attack in Donbass. But at that very moment we are speaking, there is no massive attack in Donbass. So they are preparing it, but at the moment we don't see it on the ground. So, and we are not sure that this attack will be successful. Because why? Because there are sanctions which arrive, but there are also military help for Ukraine which arrive. Not only these defensive arms, but also some important arms to attack. And military success of Russia in Ukraine is not clear at all. It's much less sure today than, let us say, 40 days ago. So what we see is a kind of hysteria, propagandistic hysteria in their state resource, but it is not supported, it is not proven by any military success. So we can interpret that like a compensation. Maybe this piece is also for internal use in a way. This is not for Ukrainians. So let us not be afraid of this bullshit, because we know this story, and they are only showing how crazy they are. But I guess this is a propaganda tool for internal hatred, for all Russian to hate Ukrainians for this failure. And what they will try to do now, they will try to find an enemy, an internal enemy, because just to justify why their army is failing in Ukraine. So what they will be doing in coming weeks, they will be trying to find somebody guilty for their failure. So, and they have to keep the moral and just to keep this propaganda very high. And to explain why this is happening.
Yes, and let's not forget that, I started this idea that we should not be comparing Hitler with Putin, but we should look at the specificity of the Putin's regime. And I think one of the specific traits is that, well, Hitlerism was kind of a dividing humanity into blocks, right? And Stalinism, partially Leninism, I would say, Leninism was doing into the blocks. Like some block of people are deserve to live, other categories of people do not deserve to live. So, for example, for Hitler, like Germans deserve to live, Jews, Slavs, Roma do not deserve to live. For Lenin, proletariat deserves to live, bourgeoisie does not, peasants do not, etc. But Stalinism already, I think, is just completely changed the very idea of value of life, meaning that no life has a value. You can sacrifice any life.
Millions.
You can sacrifice millions. You can send them to gulags. You can exterminate them. You can make Holodomor, etc. And I think Putinism is now continuing this trend. They're not valuing the life of their own citizens. They are sending their soldiers without any equipment, without any chances to survive, without any memory, which will be with these soldiers that they heroically died in Ukraine, because nobody died, as they said. Therefore, they diminished the figures of the losses, while the losses, according to Ukrainian estimates, are already over 18,000. They have the figure probably 10 times less. Ukrainian attitude to the dead is absolutely different, because I personally have seen traveling through Ukraine, passing through villages when all the village comes to bury the dead, right? And Russians, for example, they're saying we will protect Russian-speaking population, and they annihilate Mariupol, which is a Russian-speaking city mostly. They bomb heavily Kharkiv, over 1,000 or 1,500 buildings destroyed. Also Chernihiv, you mentioned, well, half of the population in Chernihiv is Russian-speaking as well. So they don't really care about Russian speakers.
They don't really care about anybody.
They don't care about Russian citizens. The only ideology is this, what they call force, the ability to destroy, the ability to make suffer. And there, as we have seen, as we have talked recently about this Russian ideology, it's a negative sum game. So even if you are about to lose, you should force your enemy to lose more, and therefore they are ready for these atrocities, for these horrible crimes that they do in Bucha and other cities.
Good news in all that this war is a suicide. It's Russian suicide. And they are quite aware of that, for example, when they state in this article about the loneliness of Russia. So Russia is alone today. For example, what we read now, I quote, Russia will have no allies in the denazification of Ukraine. No allies. So, and then they develop saying that they alone, Russia was a country who saved Europe from Nazism back in the 20th century, but now they are alone and they will follow their own path of suicide now, because no partner is possible in this cult of death and this cult of death, in fact. So they don't value their own life. And so they are alone. It's normal that they're alone, because other normal people, civilized people, they want to live, they want to develop, they want to construct something, not to die. Yeah, and at least they are aware of the fact that there will be no friendships and no partnerships, and this suicide will be a lonely suicide in this war.
Yes, but this is special way. It's the Nazi Sonderweg. We remember this very, very well. So in some aspects, history has repeats itself. We are also focusing all the time regularly on Russian propaganda, and what they have been saying after the revealing of Bucha Massacre is that, of course, it was all staged, and as the same RIA Novosti with reference to Russia's defense ministry, it was saying that it was a provocation by Ukrainian radicals. Sure. Mm-hmm. So they mean that, at some footages
Dead bodies are moving.
Dead bodies have been moving, that moving their hands or whatever, and then that some of the dead bodies were too fresh. Well, we have seen on pictures that they have been decomposing. Unfortunately, these dead bodies, and the pictures that we have been publishing, for example, are coming from the reputable sources, from Reuters, from Associated Press, from international.
Who received all that from people on the ground? So
No, who went there and filmed it by photographers
some of them,
themselves, who cooperating with these world news agencies, who came there and filmed it. So there were many international journalists who visited Bucha yesterday and we have all these witnesses.
So important thing to fix now is that they are exploring, as they usually do, numerous versions of reality. So on one hand, they publish this article stating that for their audience maybe, that all Ukrainians are Nazis. So we justify what we've done there by stating that all Ukrainians should be exterminated because they are evil, because they're Nazis or whatever, they're guilty as the government is, etc., etc. But simultaneously, at the same time, they're developing this narrative of that, this is not real, this is Ukrainians, they organize that, this is not real bodies, this is not real Bucha, this is not reality. At the same time, the third version of reality is that this Ukrainian army who organized all that, they are saying that, look, this is Ukrainian Nazis who shelled their own people and they organized all this massacre in Bucha, but this is not our responsibility. We haven't touched any civilian during this war, so this is your guilt. And at the same time, they're presenting this version of reality. And for example, Security Council of United Nations today, they are acting proactively, saying that, look what Ukrainians have done in Bucha. So this is a normal way for them to proceed. And what Peter Pomerantsev back in 2014 developed, that the Russians were using information as arms, stating that they never have only one point of view of what's happening. They are trying to create this kind of uncertainty. We don't know exactly what happened in Bucha. Maybe they were Ukrainians themselves, and maybe it was just not real at all. They were just creating the false bodies and the false photos. And at the same time, they are stating for their audience that yes, we did that, but we had right to do so because Ukrainians should be exterminated. So they are developing a number of versions of reality, this postmodern reality, where nothing is true and everything is possible. So that's what they are doing. They were doing that in, for example, MH17 case, we do remember that. They have tons of explanations what happened, and they are doing that today with Bucha. So nothing new for us. So we do understand that they're trying to explode the understanding that there is a reality. There is a reality of human lives, human bodies. I don't know. They try to annihilate reality, what they do in fact. And this is what we have to fight against. We have to bring things to facts and to say, look, there is Bucha, and there is Mariupol, and there is Kharkiv, and there is real Ukrainians, and Ukraine exists. This is a fact. We exist, and Ukrainian identity exists. So they are trying to fight against reality. So that's what they're doing.
Yes, and they should lose, and they should be punished for that. So Bucha Massacre, Mariupol Genocide, I'm afraid there will be more and more wars like this in the coming time, because we're revealing these Russian crimes. And there should be a reaction. There is nowhere to hide already. And there are clear facts. They took over Bucha. When they left, dead bodies behind themselves. People exterminated, burned, raped, mass graves. That's the reality, and that's what international society have already seen. This was the Explaining Ukraine podcast. We will continue our podcasts. We will try to get more testimonials from people who escaped these massacres. Soon you can support us on patreon.com/UkraineWorld. We make this podcast. It's a joint initiative by Internews Ukraine and Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Tetyana Ogarkova, who is in charge of international communication at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor at UkraineWorld.org. Listen to us on many platforms: SoundCloud, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube. Stay with us. Stand with Ukraine.